At the tone, standard time will be 8:14 and 40 seconds. At the tone, standard time will be 8:14 and 50 seconds. At the tone, standard time...
Father of Authors, to himself. Beyond there, is it that? On Fallerine Common, just thinking of Astley's amphitheatre, where the Bobby restrained you making sugar-stuck coat to the ghost white horse of the pepper.
Family symbolizing Jappy Jack. His house about him within variable God's church. At one time, Jesse's right. Our king with a peach of Pick up for flesh, Nelly. Guinness thought to rule in Jimmy a nice how to
tie cutting was an unintended one. Huh? John appeared with a frock coat, you know. Yeah, so I thought it is a hypocrisy that he is bringing down all, you know, rules of music and concert going and then appear in frock coat, and he did. So I thought, I will cut that off. Well, I heard John is not rich guy, and then frock coat would cost few $100. It will be, you know, unfair. I thought I will then cut a tail of the neck, white shirt's tail. Shampoo, I intended to shampoo. Number one, he didn't come with frock coat, but he came with normal, you know. Then I took shirts off, then I found that he has no undershirts. I think it's impolite. And then I saw his tie, you know. So instead of this, I cut his tie. I never liked his tie because he makes very short ties.
The collaboration is in their intent to create a work and a performance of time, and yet they're not going to impose their individual wills on it, and they let you make the judgment as to what the work's worth is. And it's the importance of removing their own prejudices and their own need to say, this is mine, this is how I perceive art, this is how I perceive music. That kind of intent is almost impossible to find because everyone has their own egos and their own.
Yeah, we have a real response of your Michael.
Yeah, I can't disagree more.
Well,
one of the great problems is water. The reason that 2/3 of the water has to be used to keep the lawns green. And if they would all just put in cactus and local plants, then the water thing wouldn't be far less. But they think they have to have those green lawns.
Oh, they won't let me wear my blue jeans
In
Kyoto.
Oh, why do you have to
And
wear?
they found from Toshi that I will insist on wearing blue jeans. So they're going to cover me up with a kimono.
How marvelous. I hope they get a picture of that.
They
Your
will.
ethnic costume, that's what it says.
They will.
Do that. That's marvelous.
I said in my letter to them, could they consider blue jeans ethnic? And apparently they can. I said my jacket was Amish. Actually, I have new pants and everything. I should think they'd let me.
I think that dance still does fascinate me just as much as it ever did. It remains, in that sense, unknown. And for that I'm grateful, frankly, because it has such fluid, like water. It just goes through your fingers. You know it's there, it's a substance, but at the same time it disappears. And it's so full of what to me, anyway, are possibilities.
We were very, very poor, Sanya and I. And the idea of making sound effects music for NBC or CBS didn't work. And also Peggy Guggenheim decided not to present my percussion orchestra in her Art of This Century gallery, which I had hoped she would do, because then she had promised to also pay for the transportation of the instruments here. None of that happened. And instead, the path was through Gene Erdman and Joe Camo to make the Credo in Us.
Merce never interfered with the sets or the ideas about what that was going to be like. Merce and I most often collaborated by his saying, "Oh, Bob," after saying, "How are you?" "Oh, Bob, I'm working on a new piece. I'll send you my regular stick figures." And I would work from that, finish my part, just as John Cage used to write all the music before the piece, you know. And everybody had to tolerate each other. It was the most excruciating collaboration, but it was the most exciting and most real, because nobody knew what anybody else was doing until it was too late.
I suppose they were roughly like amateur shows, and we did quite a number of those. I remember going down because Mrs. Barrett would manage to talk them into having us. They'd never heard of us, naturally. And I remember once we were walking down together down the street in Los Angeles, and Mrs. Barrett stopped and looked at us, and she said, "Quit walking in a line like a bunch of amateurs." Absolutely stunned at that idea. That's so amazing.
People used to sneak in to watch rehearsals, and they would crawl on their hands and knees, because if Merce saw them, he could be quite strong about asking them to leave. You know, they'd practically cover themselves in black veils, sneak in order to be present at rehearsals, because that they found so fascinating. There'd be this total silence, and we would be dancing away.
I wanted to study with Merce, and I had seen him in Denver, Colorado in 3 master classes, and I had never seen anyone move as he moved. And I was profoundly struck by the animal grace, the intensity, everything.
Here's another. The villagers celebrate. An astrologer arrives, lamenting the death of his wife. She appears rejuvenated. She informs him that the gods have taken pity on him. She loves him. His fears reach a climax. Her candle goes out. Doubtful of his love if he knows the truth, she nevertheless enters the royal household, intercepted by the king's minister, who renounces his plan to rob her. She, in love with love, is penniless. He asks her to run away with the king. She goes mad. He, impressed, urges revenge. well, it's marvelous, yes, the relation with Merce, except that that's been more, I think it's been very, what you might call organic. I mean to say, in the fact that it's been living and that it's taken different forms. So that the relation that we have, or that our thoughts or works have, isn't fixed. There's no, nor is anything being consciously accomplished.
I thought, well, I certainly never want to dance like this, but I'd like to know how. So I decided to go to New York.
I've actually felt, I've always felt more at home than I have in Europe.
In 1965, I invited him to perform a concert at Brandeis, where I was. He said immediately, well, I'll come on a condition that you do a piece, and also Christian Wolff. I said, well, I've been working with the brainwave amplifier. I haven't made a piece out of it yet. He said, well, you've got to do that. So it was that, what would you call it? That kind of a force of saying, you know, you've got to try these things. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. It's more important to explore that. And so I did. And that was a breakthrough. the breakthrough, I think, in my life.
From the time that I knew him, he never seemed to do anything simply for himself, whether it was just with himself and Merce, or with himself and David Tudor, or Morton Feldman, or myself, Earl Brown, and so forth. It's always a kind of communal effort, which was extremely, I mean, wonderful, obviously, for the people involved, but also very important, I think, for getting the music out.
John's work, all embracing the Zen approach to meditation, less focusing on a single point, but accepting all sounds, all thoughts, whereas in my work, it grew out of the yogic approach to meditation, where you're focused on a single point. And all of my work with frequency, tuning, precise frequency relationships, it's just exactly the other side of the coin.
For example, with space, if you always orientate your movement in one direction, say, to or from, say, a front, that's the way you think, then everything outside of that seems to me from that. But if rather, and I found this very quickly in working out, I think even in Sweet by Chance, that instead of thinking, now I'm facing this way, now I'm veering from that, when I'm facing this way, this is front. This is, rather than thinking it in reference to this, think of it as being here, and so on, equally so that all directions became possible to think of as the front. But, and as I've continued to work that way, I had to figure out a way to tell dancers, particularly when we began to work with video, more than anything else, but even before that, what front was, because it kept changing. So I realized instead of saying, instead of referring to points in space, like I'm going toward this point, you have to think I'm going from yourself in that direction. And when you get there, that's where you are, and you may have changed your position, and then you have to think in a different direction. And it's very, in the beginning, it was very puzzling. It works, it isn't that, but it was puzzling because we were all accustomed to thinking the other way. We still do when we get on the stage. At the same time, this affected the way I could think about how you even make class exercises, how I did, the way you could think about space, so that you weren't always thinking in reference to a single point, but think in multiple directions. at Black Mountain, you sat on a porch for dining, one of the places you could sit with screened porch, looking over the lake at the landscape in the distance. And Mrs. Rice one day at lunch said, I've been looking at this view for 20 years, and I've come to realize there's only one tree that's out of place.
One that I wanted to do with Merce particularly, which I had radio transmitters on him which monitored his respiration and pulmonary functions. And the sound was entirely his sounds. Well, Merce, of course, has this extraordinary dynamic range. Whether he was moving fast or moving slowly, the dynamics of the rate of change in what you saw was not related to the rate of change of his physical instrument. What I liked about it particularly was that it was a much more lyrical and less pushy kind of sound situation that moved along like the tides move, you know, more slowly like that.
Through international bankruptcy, social realization, no other in which so that people ceases to do government which they, of thee, this, which life, according to them, but a process, a social, or human collective, or individual, wield them and succeed. The ideas, wishes, and government we have run wild in liberty. Them, but they, one, we, the most thee, and to change the nature of music. The fraud prospect of American, whether for their own government is for ultra-high social wealth, public they. It, a man draws now as social realization world over, and stakes his R and theory to make known as exist among the people united intelligence, rather than government is.
Chandigarh is a city north of Delhi, and it took how many, 2 hours, a bus?
Yeah, we had a bus.
We went on a local bus loaded with...
They told us an air-conditioned bus, and there was a sort of van that sort of weekly went around.
Jammed with everything, animals, people, children, boxes of things, and us. And on this, but it was an astonishing trip, that ride. We got there late at night, and we went to the first place to hotel to get, and they said, "Oh yes, do you have your bedrolls?"
Yes.
And we said no. So we went to another one, and they didn't have rooms or something. But the one we ended up in was beautiful. I had a gorgeous view of the Himalayas.
This morning, when poor Merce was doing this yoga, you know, he does such complicated things. He stands on his head, and he stands on 2 arms and everything. I said, that must be very hard. Why do you keep doing it? He said, well, it's the only way I can stand up now, because my feet hurt so much. Isn't that terrible? It's just terrible. Isabel, she is so pretty, truth to tell. Wildwood's eyes and primrose hair. Quietly, all the woods so wild. In moves of moss and daphne dews, how all so still she lay, 'neath of the white thorn, child of tree, like some lost happy leaf, like blowing flowers stilled, as fain would she anon, for soon again 'twill be, win me, woo me, wed me, ah, weary me.
Well, definitely dance doesn't have an age. Of course, when one's body is young, dance looks pretty. But when one's body is wise, dance looks beautiful. There is a difference between beauty and prettiness.
Yes, suddenly I was having this thought about John and Merce after the way we've been speaking about them and all. As a matter of fact, these two gentlemen are angels who have a particular task in our time. And part of that, it seems to me, is to work artistically, work creatively, this time with such an affirming touch, such an affirming touch in the work that they do, such an affirmation of life and of ongoing work, of working. Merce is the work of art, a work of art. Well, that's what he does. He has a work of art and continually works as a lifestyle. And John's work also in the way that he speaks about the music and the composition and all that's and his relationship to Zen Buddhism or whatever. It is essentially life-affirming in a time when, not only in the arts, but in general, there's this real uncertainty about whether a life will continue or indeed whether it should continue, or whether the human being is, you know, is finished, whether that's an episode that's finished. And it seemed to me suddenly that John and Merce are like angels whose life, this life, however hard it has been for them, has been dedicated to this kind of task. And it partly accounts for their faithfulness, I think, and their faithfulness in times of great, you know, risk and lack of support and so on. But as if there were something extraordinary at stake.
Yes, in the Volkswagen bus, John was driving, and a policeman stopped us and pulled us over and asked a lot of questions about this or that. And he said we had been speeding in a non-speed zone. I don't know how you can do that in a Volkswagen bus, but, but anyway. And he asked quite a few questions, because obviously this was odd, this group and this funny-looking car and so on. And finally he said to John, well, I'm going to give you a citation. And John said, oh, thank you. I haven't had one of those in a long time.
Silence is not silence to me, not the absence of sound, but is all of what we call non-musical sound. I actually prefer sound to music. And I like the sounds that I hear. I couldn't be happier than I am in this apartment with the sounds from 6th Avenue constantly surprising me, never once repeating themselves. You know the story of the African prince who went to London and they played a whole program of music for him. And he said, orchestral music. He said, why do you always play the same piece over and over? They never do that on 6th Avenue, it seems to me. But that's because I'm listening in an, as though I have never heard it before, you know.
Well, I saw Merce in 1960 in New York, and that probably was, in terms of dancing, the most important time in my life, because suddenly I discovered real modernity in dancing that we have never seen in Europe. So I was, for 25 years, very much attached to Merce. At the beginning, I thought it was avant-garde, and now I know it's pure classicism. Except when you see Oratorio, you see that it's both avant-garde and creativity and real modernity and also classicism. It's like a Balanchine of his generation. And that's probably the reason why I've been asking him about 11 times now to come to France, or usually to Europe also.
We bring that to 40%. Number 1 to 40. To 40, please. Yes, that's good. And also number 4, 240. Okay. That's correct.
Right at the outset, somebody told me that John wanted to see me. It might have been Merce, because Merce was in my class. So I went to see John, and he said, because he was interested in starting a percussion group, and he wanted players. And he wondered if I'd be interested, and I said, oh, sure. And so he handed me a little piece of paper with a rhythm written on it, you know, and he said, can you play this? So Merce was there. I can remember Merce saying, well, that's a silly question. You know, I was a rhythmics teacher. So I played it, and John, I guess I passed. I couldn't, this was completely new to me. This was something I had never, and all this percussion stuff, it was all so new to me. You know, I'd been educated in much more conventional type music, and it just opened up such a wide variety of new things to me that it was marvelous. Knowing John changed my life. There's no question.
I remember rehearsing Variation with him in his apartment on 17th Street. It was quite an astonishing experience for me, because that dance, he was really, you know, at the peak of what he could do. I mean, he was leaping in the air and landing on one foot, elevated, and staying there for 60 seconds, you know, absolutely motionless. And just, I mean, just listening to it happen in the space was really beautiful, because, you know, there was extraordinary movement and then absolute stillness. You know, and as a musician, that's one of the ways that I experience dance is in the sounds that they produced. Because it's not my habit to look at dance while I'm performing, but to listen to it at the same time. Because it's like it's part of, I wouldn't say that it's part of my music, but it's part of the experience of producing the music.
I was in, I think, North Carolina, and they came down and said that they would like me to do that. And I thought, who else would do it? And then I thought, well, maybe I would do it in a way that would offend me less than if the other people who are available did it, which was a terrible way to make a decision, and an arrogant one, but nevertheless, that was my feeling. Having a sense of what he is about, I've always had the feeling that I would try to work to not interfere with that expression, and to leave it free of any kind of thing of mine that it had to carry. So that most often I've done very little. I just tried to make it unoffensive, not to amplify or interfere with, which are also good ways of working, giving people the opportunity to be more athletic in examining the work, to find what it is about. John Cage was playing chess on a more or less regular basis with Marcel Duchamp. I had just seen a little booklet which had tracings of the details of the large glass. Each element by itself. And I thought they were very beautiful. And I said to Merce that I thought it would be nice if he did a dance using a set of Marcel's. And Merce said something like that would be nice. Will you ask him? And so I saw Marcel and I said it would be very nice if there could be a set for Merce based on the large glass. And he sort of gaped at me and said, who would do the work? Meaning not he. And I said, I would do it. And he said, oh, fine. I screened these images on the plastic and then painted them. When Marcel saw the work, he said that he would like the different images to be put together in the same relationship they had in the large glass at some moment in the dance. And I think that was done near the end of the dance. And they were arranging the bows that would be taken. And I said that I didn't want to be on stage for a bow. Marcel said he would be. He and I were in the audience, and when time came for him to go up, I sort of offered to help him, which help he shrugged off. And he said, aren't you coming? And I said, no. And he turned and he said, I'm just as frightened as you are.
He did it with great applause.
You bet. Yes, he was wonderful.
I rather quickly found out in Los Angeles that professional musicians didn't consider my music music. But dancers did consider it music. And furthermore, they considered it useful, something that they could perform in public. It was perhaps studying with him that gave me the determination to devote my life, which I had promised him I would do, to music. But I actually really decided to be a composer through one experience I remember in particular, when in front of a rather large class, I don't know just what it was and why it was so large, but there were people in it, and there were people who had written music in it, and who were invited by him to play their music in front of the class. And in the course of this, which as I recall was at USC, he suddenly said to all of us, he said, "My purpose in teaching you is to make it impossible for you to compose." And perhaps you could say that my reaction was one of stubbornness. But I remember being determined by his unwillingness to let me write music. I remember being determined to do it.